Shalom, friends. Welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you all for joining. I know we are going to have some more folks joining us soon. Very happy to be here. I think our partner is running a little bit late. Super happy to be here with Rabbi Shlomo. Rabbi Shlomo also requested that he could also give his introduction, so I'm going to give him that ability. Thank you so much for being with us today, Rabbi Shlomo.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to the Valley Big Midrash for hosting this program, first of all. And thank you all for coming, for joining today. My name is Shlomo Levin, and I served as a rabbi for many years in the United States. And then recently, I also got a master's degree in international law and human rights from a wonderful program called the United Nations University for Peace in Costa Rica. And I wrote here, you can see I put on the screen a Haggadah. It's called the Human Rights Haggadah. And what it does is it points out human rights issues as they come up in the Passover story, giving a little bit of a secular source and a Jewish source, and most importantly, discussion questions to understand the values and the conflicting values behind each issue. And you wouldn't be surprised. Almost every human rights issue that's in the news comes up in the Haggadah, from slavery, from hard labor, to refugees, when Jacob goes down to Egypt fleeing famine, from reparations, when the Israelites leave Egypt with wealth, and so on. Everything just about is in there. And I'm going to begin just in a moment. We're going to point out, we're going to talk today about one section of Haggadah. I just want to mention two other comments before we get started. One is, this class was originally scheduled to take place in October, and we postponed it because it's the beginning of the war, and we thought it wasn't the right time. And we had hoped that by now there wouldn't be a war and we would have moved on to a better situation of peace. I just want to recall that and remember that even though we've settled maybe a little more into routine, we still remember the hostages and we still pray for peace in Israel and in Gaza, first of all. And second of all, the other thing I want to say about our class, turning back to our session today, is I believe very strongly when we talk about human rights, it needs to be discussion. Human rights means sharing different perspectives and different ideas. And I really don't intend to just lecture, as I want to hear people's thoughts and people's ideas and responses as we go along. So what I'm going to ask is, stay on mute unless you're speaking. If you'd like to speak, raise your Zoom hand. Let me call on you and then unmute. And then I'll see if you can make sort of a short comment, whatever it is. And if I have to, I might just interrupt you a little bit just to clarify or just to keep us. Okay. Well, let's go ahead. And what I want to do is focus today on something that's pretty well known right in the beginning of the Haggadah, which is ha-lachma anya. And we say this at the start of the Seder, that this is the bread of affliction holding up the matzah. And we say, all who are hungry, let them come and eat. Kol dichrin yetev yechol, kol ditzrich yetev yifsach. All in need, let them come and join our celebration of the holiday and join in our Passover food and in our Passover feast. And I want to ask a very fundamental question. Is this a statement of human rights values when we say that? Are we attempting to fulfill our human rights values because we believe everyone must receive, everyone is entitled to food as a basic necessity? Or should we understand this some other way? I'm not even going to ask how. I don't know. I'm not even going to comment on how. What do you think is going on here? That's an opening question. Maybe someone will raise his Zoom hand and see what you think. Any comments? Just a question. Is food a human right? Let me ask it another way. It's well known. It's a fact that in the world today, the earth produces enough calories to feed every single person. There's no question about it. When you do scientific calculations, you know how many calories are grown from how much corn, how much soybeans. There's plenty of calories, there's plenty of nutrition available to feed every person. So if some people don't have enough to eat, it's not because of a necessity. It's not because there's no other way. It's not because of scarcity. It must be because of some decisions, some actions we've taken about how, or some system we've created for sharing the food unequally. Does that make it a human rights issue per se, or is it still something else?
Definitely a human rights issue, although it's
Well, Lauren, so
hi.
go ahead.
It's a human rights issue, and just like housing and so many other things, and it's greed that's blocking the way for everyone to have that
Okay.
human right.
Okay, Lauren says that it's for sure a human rights issue. And then Lauren, as you say rightly, if you say housing, if you say food, why stop there? Why not also talk about all basic necessities together? Food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, and those should all be rights. Okay. Just when we just ask, raise your Zoom hand if you can, just so two people don't talk at once. I'll just ask any one other person, do you agree or disagree with that? Any other thoughts or comments? Does anyone think it's not a human right? Does anyone see any reason why food should not be a human right? Any downside to considering it a human right? Oh, go ahead, Eddie. Say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, wasn't this like put into vote and the United States voted against it?
We'll come to that.
Okay.
We'll come to that.
Okay.
Okay. Let me show you something. I'm going to show you the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'll just keep it like this. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was voted on and passed by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. So it's a non-binding declaration. It can't be legally enforced per se, but it's come to be seen as very influential, very authoritative thinking. This is Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services. Everything is included, all basic necessities, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or any other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. So I think it is fair to say that the answer here is yes. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights clearly includes basic economic rights within the bundle. And as you can just sense also here, there's an awful lot of human rights included in the Universal Declaration. This is Article 25, so imagine how much there is, but this is included in it. Okay, I want to just ask one more time. Can anyone see a downside? Does anyone oppose? Anyone think it shouldn't be? Or even think it shouldn't be? Does anyone see a problem with calling basic needs a human right?
It's not a problem, but if we sorry, I didn't raise my Zoom hand.
You're excused. Just remember next time you're excused when
I mean I will need to change a lot of systems to it's interesting that it's like such a human right that it didn't, like, before seeing this invitation, it didn't occur to me that it was a human right. Like, it was so given in my mind, but there we make such a big deal out of other human rights, or is something a human right, like what decisions to make about our own bodies, or who we want to marry, or like are these well, I don't know, civil right or human right, either way, like it's just so it's so overlooked as a human
let me
right.
ask you a question. Just let me ask you a question. I would ask everybody, we don't have time. Let me ask you a question. If I would say human rights, what's the first right that would come to mind? Like, if there's a lot of things you could call it, but what's the first thing you would think of as for sure the most fundamental of all the human rights? What do you think? Just first thing off the top of your head.
The right to unlawful persecution.
Unlawful persecution. Okay, good. Okay, and just someone, anyone will chime in just a couple more. Just a couple more. Or maybe chat. Put it in the chat if you want. Also, a couple. Right? I say food. Okay, food. Eddie says food again. There's one more I didn't catch in the chat that just flew by. Okay. The point I want to make is sometimes the first thing that we think of about human rights are more what you would call political rights, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom from the government can't overturn, freedom from arbitrary government power. The government can't arrest me or detain me with no reason. I can't be punished without first being put through a process of law. You know, these are the most basic, the right to vote, for example. These are sometimes those political rights sometimes come to mind first, is my point. But then what people will argue is, what good are political rights, the right to assemble, the right to protest, all these kinds of things? What good is the right to assemble, to protest, to vote, to have religion, if you're starving? You can't use these rights unless you have economic rights. So economic rights have to come first. That's the argument in favor. Let me show you another source here. The next, a little bit before actually, but in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights itself, and it sort of hints at a little bit of a problem. Article 22. Everyone is a member of society, has the right to social security, and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality. I just want to throw in the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. What is the problem here? This is already hinting at a big problem. Notice the middle of Article 22. National effort, international cooperation, in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, and the freedom to choose your employment. What's the problem here? What's going on? I'll throw out a suggestion. Take a political right, the right to vote, the right to assemble, the right to freedom of assembly. Now, I know governments can plead security. Okay, but besides security, can the government give an excuse for taking those away? What's a valid excuse for taking those away? Because they can't come up with one practically, aside from, extraordinary security situations. When it comes to economics, what if the government pleads poverty and says, look, it's great to say everybody has the rights to food, clothing, and shelter, but the government can't afford it. We can't do it. And understanding, just in theoretical terms, human rights are fundamentally an obligation on governments. Governments are responsible for fulfilling human rights, and so the governments essentially retain their legitimacy to the extent that they fulfill the human rights of their citizens, right? And the government says that's nice, that everybody has economic rights. We're doing the best we can, but all we can do is very little. Now, someone just said in the comments, tax the rich, and fine, okay, you can always argue that a government could do that type of thing or could do more, argue about tax dollars, but someone will come and say, we're a poor country, we can't do it. Someone could say that, a country could say that, or a country could start to squabble about the tax code and all the problems, whatever. But one key distinction between economic and political rights is political rights, no excuses. No reason why people can't vote. You can't take away the vote from some class of citizens. There's no reason for that. No reason why people can't have freedom of religion. What business does the government have taking away freedom of religion? So we can define these as human rights in absolute terms. Whereas economic rights, is there any society in the history of the world where every citizen has all of their needs, food, clothing, and shelter? Is that always attainable? And so calling it a right may be very, very empty. And that's one issue here to think of. We call that aspirational. Maybe economic rights are more aspirational. The government should aspire to these things, but the expectation the government will realize them might not be realistic. Erwin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the key there is that it says according to the government. And there are different governments have different conceptions of what it means to vote and what it means. All these things are defined differently by different governments. So, it's fine to make a general statement, but when it comes to actually making this real, it's all up to the specific states, according to this document.
Right. I want to make a comment about that. Sure. But here's the thing. All human. That means we're all equal. Fundamentally, human rights, the idea of human rights is they ought to be the same for everyone. It doesn't matter where I live. It doesn't matter my society. It doesn't matter my religion. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. The fact that I'm a human being, if something is a human right, because I'm a human being, I should be entitled to it. And suddenly these economic rights are going to depend on the government's economic means and policies, and it's going to weigh economic decisions. And it cuts against equality, the idea that human rights should be independent of all of these external factors, leaving it up to the government. That's an issue here. I'm just going to share one more short source about this while we're on that topic here. I'm going to share with you. Well, let me ask you guys something else. We also saw the right to work. Remember that source in the Declaration of Human Rights. It said everybody has the right to choose a profession according to their desires, and the right to choose their work and stuff like that. How is that going to go with economic rights? Is there a problem there? I'll read it to you. Remember, it said everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, from a free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. How is that going to go with economic rights? I would suggest to you there might be a problem. Remember, human rights are a demand on the government. The government has to fulfill them. So what if the government says, look, we're responsible for making sure all of our citizens have food, have clothing and shelter, and then everybody runs around telling us what job they want to do. Just trying to exercise their right to choose their employment. Everyone runs around deciding what they want to study. We can't have that here. We're responsible for this. We don't have time for artists. We don't have time for authors. We don't have time for liberal arts majors. We need more dentists. We need more farmers. We need more miners. And the point is, when you give a government responsibility, you're going to have to give that government corresponding power to fulfill that responsibility. And those government powers may end up conflicting with personal freedoms. We can't have it both ways. Go ahead, Lauren.
No, I was just going to say, as noble as the idea is, it's completely impractical, right? What if you're like, you want to be a doctor, but you have absolutely no way that you could get through the course. Like, it's just not you. You just can't do it. You're not capable of it. You can't force a university to take you. You can't force a college of medicine to take you. And even with the job, I mean, you can try and even out things so that there's no discrimination because of color, religion, gender, but you can't force an employer to hire someone. I guess the best you can do is in the civil service and expand. I'm Canadian, by the way, and expand the civil service. So my ideas are very different than Americans. So that you can hire as many people as possible, and the special people for minorities who otherwise won't be hired, assuming that they have the credentials and the capabilities. But unfortunately, it's not practical.
And this becomes the question. Like I said, when people have the freedom to choose their employment, to pursue their dreams, whatever they are, this is going to conflict with other societal priorities and may jeopardize the gross domestic product, which would go up if everybody was directed into where they are most valuable in society. We don't have. The point is, this became sort of a communist. And when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted, this was a big dispute amongst different blocs. But the communist bloc was all in favor of this. Exactly. We're going to take charge. The government is in charge of the economy. The government is in charge of providing bread for the citizens. And the government is going to tell everybody what to do. No more freedoms for everybody to pursue their dreams and do what they want. And we don't. That conflicts with the government's responsibility with the rights of others. And you dreaming of becoming a whatever is conflicting with other people's economic rights. And those things don't always go together. All right, I wanted to sort of finish up this train of thought with one other source, which is people that support economic rights as indivisible with political rights. Which I will tell you in truth, I think is the trend in human rights law today, have kind of realized, I think, that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a bit of an overreach. It was too much of a grab, and trying to require governments to actually provide this is just not viable. It's too much. So they took it back a little bit. And this is from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. And this is just their website. but a current website where they explain what the right to food in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights means. And this is what the Office of the United Nations Human Rights High Commissioner says: accessibility. Food must be affordable. Individuals should be able to have an adequate diet without compromising on other basic needs, such as school fees, medicines, or rent. Food should be accessible to the physically vulnerable, including children, sick people, people with disabilities, and the elderly. Food must also be available to people in remote areas, to victims of armed conflicts or natural disasters, and to prisoners. Do you see here a change? I would call it a change. Anyone sees a change? Like, what did we started off with everybody having the right to food, and now it's the right to what exactly? What do you think? Someone raises Zoom hands. Lauren. Go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry for monopolizing. This is the right to accessible, affordable food, which is a different kind of concept, but they made it completely universal. Whether you're in a war situation or whatever, every human being should be able to have easy access to food.
Yeah,
That's not
under
easy
this
to do.
understanding, under this understanding, the quote, well, what does the government have to do? Is the government go off the hook a little bit? Go ahead, Jess. Go ahead, yeah.
So to me, it's saying like people have the right to be able to pay their bills, because it's saying food should not compromise things like school fees, medicines, or rent. So that is like going above and beyond that. Like whoever is the United Nations is saying people should be able to should have the right to have their basic needs
I want to
above and
focus on
beyond.
the word accessibility. I want to focus on the word accessibility because I think that was the key here, is that the responsibility of government sort of goes from making sure that everybody has their needs met to everybody has the ability to have access to being able to have their needs met. So the point being is food, not do they have food, but is it accessible? Like, this also brings up the issue of personal responsibility. What if the government wants to say something like this? Hey, we've done our job here of helping our citizens, but some of our citizens won't do anything. They won't help themselves. We're not their babysitter. We're not their nanny, their mommy. So what is the government going to say? We've made it accessible. Jobs are accessible. Social security is accessible. Food is accessible. It's not a food desert. It's not, but that's the end of government responsibility there. We're not making sure everybody has their basic needs. We're just creating a society in which people can succeed at meeting their needs if they want, or if they try, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, Lauren, go ahead one more time.
So this, as a Canadian, this really comes up because we have remote areas, mostly First Nations reserves, that are very remote, that only have like ice roads in the winter, and now that's melting, and it's a problem, and you can only fly in. So food is really difficult to get. Fresh fruit and vegetables are nearly impossible, and they cost a fortune. And I mean, I worked at one point up in Moosonee, which is pretty far north, and I was shocked at the prices of things. And of course, the cheapest stuff was like the sugary stuff that was the worst for the First Nations people because they tend to be diabetic. And probably Canadian government should really be subsidizing it and ensuring that they get proper nutrition.
That's, I think, exactly what the High Commissioner is saying, is that the government is responsible for making food accessible, including the people in remote areas, and you have to build an ice road, and of course they can't grow food, in the middle of the winter. The government has to make it accessible to them, but the government doesn't have to go house to house to make sure everybody ate their vegetables, that everyone has. That's too much to demand of the government. Here's what I want to do. I want to switch gears a little bit, look at a Jewish. I want to show you Maimonides from, and let's see what his view is here. And I took this page right out of the Haggadah. Pardon me, it's not the Rambam. I apologize. I'm taking this from the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish. So it says like this: it's a positive commandment to give tzedakah, according to tzedakah meaning charity, to help the poor and so forth, according to one's ability. And we must be very careful about this because it can even lead to bloodshed should a beggar die while waiting for his sustenance. And we all understand, what that means. If someone is. But here's the thing: how much should we give a poor person? The answer: whatever he lacks. How? If he's hungry, feed him. If he needs clothing, clothe him. If he has no household utensils, buy them for him. Even if he was accustomed to riding a horse with a servant running before him when he was wealthy, and then he became poor, buy him a horse and a servant. So too for everyone according to their needs. So let me ask you a question. What is the perspective here? It comes from the Talmud, it's also in Maimonides, it's also in the Code of Jewish Law. What is the perspective here on charity? And of course, this is one voice in the Jewish tradition. We know the Jewish tradition has many voices, speaks with many voices. But what is here? Are we seeing a human rights perspective here, or what do we see? Any comments from anyone? We give them whatever they need. Utensils, if they need utensils, food, if they were wealthy and then they became poor, we raised their standard of living up to when it was when they were wealthy, because that's what they're accustomed to. Is that sort of in keeping with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with the High Commissioner of Human Rights? Is that something different? All right, Lauren.
I'm sorry. Nobody else is standing up. It's above and beyond. Really, I was totally with it until it said, well, if he was born to a rich family and he was used to a servant, you should give him a servant. Like, all the ways make sense. And it's probably even doable. I remember when I lived in Israel in the 80s, and it doesn't exist anymore. Now there's hungry people there. There was subsidized food. You could go to the Makolet, there was subsidized eggs, subsidized frozen chicken, subsidized pitot, and milk. And you could manage on it. So, like, no matter how poor you were, you had food. And the Sachnut at that time provided apartments. Like, it really, really was in accordance with the halachic definition of charity and helping to get work.
You think what the Sachnut was doing in Israel is what the Shulchan Aruch said?
I really believe so. Now that I read that, it seems to be. Unfortunately, they had a capitalistic revolution and everything changed, but there was a time that it was like that.
I want to focus on like this. What the Shulchan Aruch just said, what we just read as a Jewish source, is that it's similar to what we read in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or not?
It's
is it
above
something
it.
different?
It's above it.
Do you think it's sort of means to go above and beyond, is the way you'd phrase it? It's a good way to put it, and I want to come back to that in just a minute. It's above and beyond. Okay. Any other comments though on that? Is it the same? Is it different? Above and beyond? And what is above and any other comments there? Thought I saw a couple of hands. Jess.
Above and beyond to me I agree with you, but it suggests like something really lovely and positive, the phrase above and beyond. Whereas I would say the servant and potentially the horse, but I don't know, because that's, transportation. The servant,
pretty extreme, saying if he's used to having a servant in front of him on a horse, you have to give him a servant and a horse. That's pretty above and beyond,
I think. It's beyond, not. It's more overboard. Like, it's not. I'm not comfortable with that part.
Why aren't you comfortable? What's uncomfortable with it? Obviously, one question is going to be, and this I think the Shulchan Aruch would respond, is if you can't afford it, obviously you should give one person their basic food before you give the other guy his horse. I think everybody understands that. But is there anything else that makes you uncomfortable?
I don't know. I need to think about it more. But my gut reaction is that if we're going to give everyone a servant who used to have a servant, then there's plenty of people who never had food, and we won't be able to afford to give them food. So,
okay.
But I don't, maybe there is something deeper that's uncomfortable. I need to think about it.
I didn't quote the whole Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but the key opening statement, and I think the key underpinnings of everything to do with human rights, is the belief that human beings are fundamentally equal. You know, it doesn't, again, we're all born in different, those are accidents of birth, that we're come to different circumstances, different cultures, and some we all understand, but that there are some basic things that unite us all. Because we are human, there are some things we must have, and we're all equal on this planet, and don't divide us. And I sense just maybe that's what's bothering you about the Shulchan Aruch here, is that the fundamental starting point there doesn't seem to be that we're all equal. It seems to be, well, everybody's coming from a different place, and the goal of tzedakah is to put everybody back where they used to be. Not to put everybody in the same place, but to put everybody where these are. Everyone's not going to be treated the same. According to the Shulchan Aruch, everybody's not treated the same. How you're treated depends on these other factors, these accidents of birth, depends on your economic status, depends on your prestige, and we're not treating everybody the same anymore. And the question is, I would argue that's not a human rights perspective. That a human rights perspective on charity would have to come from a place of equality, first of all. The way it says in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, every person has the right to the following thing. And going, as you put it, Lauren, above and beyond is problematic, because if it's not for everybody, if we go above and beyond for one, where's not another one? But let me just one other question. If the Shulchan Aruch is not coming from a human rights perspective to the matter of tzedakah, could anyone give a sense of what perspective it might be coming from? If this isn't about, if the Shulchan Aruch isn't saying to help the poor because the poor are entitled to their basic necessities, because everybody's a little bit different here, or what are we doing? Why would we say that? Why would we say restore everybody to where they were? What could be the motivation for that? Like, what could be the thinking behind the Shulchan Aruch? I'm asking us to speculate a little bit. I mean, we could do a little more research in Jewish sources too, but in the meantime, just asking us to speculate. Lawrence says human dignity, but again, if it's about human dignity, why aren't we all the same? Why does someone who used to be rich need a horse? If a horse is necessary for dignity, then doesn't everybody need a horse? Why are we treating people? What's going on? I mean, what could be behind that? I don't think it's a belief that we're all not equal necessarily. I don't think it's like a caste type thing. I wouldn't say that, but what is going on? But to think about maybe other frameworks or other motivations for tzedakah that are not human rights motivated. I'll give you an idea. This is an idea that comes to my mind. The separate issue here, another concern we might have, is very selfish almost, from the perspective of the person who's doing the helping. And by that I mean, if someone becomes impoverished and we don't help them, if someone's basic needs are not, or if someone's what they perceive to be their needs is not being met, if their status is not being respected, whatever it is, what is likely to be the result of that? Rebellion, social upheaval, all these kinds of problems. Meaning, if someone's basic needs are not being met, they're likely to resort to crime. They're likely to do antisocial behaviors. If someone is dissatisfied, is embittered and bitterly dissatisfied with their lot in life, they'll become sickness and death to them. But I mean, what is the consequences for people who are wealthy, who are in luck at this time, or whatever it is? It is, if we don't help poor people, we're going to have societal problems, or problems, political problems, social upheavals. We're going to have crime. We're going to have people have violence, revolution. We're going to have people resorting to illegal activities, things that we don't want. And we might understand here, this is a very different perspective on economic rights. We might say it's important to make sure everybody has their basic necessities. Forget human rights, because it's in the interest of society in order to have stability, in order to have social stability, and all that kind of stuff. And that's what's going on here. And that's why we're okay with treating people differently. Because we're not, this is sort of a Band-Aid to make sure nobody gets too upset, nobody gets too hurt, so everybody will be satisfied, no one will complain too much. So we treat people based on on their personal situation, something like that. It's a very, very different way of looking at things than equitable instead of equal. Okay, maybe I don't know if it's equitable even. I don't know, but we're looking at things from a much more utilitarian perspective, I would say. And of course, the Jewish perspective is not monolithic. There are many different sources in the Talmud and Jewish, but I just point this out that this is another totally separate way of looking at the problem, a separate philosophy, separate way of looking at charity, which is not a human rights lens, I would argue. Okay. Let me ask you another question, and I know this is very broad here, and we can't, we can't, just a quick reaction to it. We can't go too much because it's too broad to try to pin it down. Think about our society in the United States. I know we have some Canadians here. I don't know if anyone's from another country. So we're all at least familiar with the United States, let's say. And then Canada probably fits into the same mold. What is the view of the government of the United States, do you think, about economic rights? I mean, what does our society say? The United States Constitution certainly includes a lot of political rights. We have the Bill of Rights. What is the position of the United States government? Does the United States government feel obligated to meet the economic needs or rights of its citizens, do you think? Or, by the way, the United States government did join the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, voted for it. Erwin, I see your hand. Go ahead. Erwin, did you want to speak?
This is actually a very present political issue in the United States. There's no single United States government position on this, but we have policies, programs in the United States that speak directly to the right to food. We have SNAP, we have children, the WIC program. We have a concern about hunger, and different political positions advocate differently. Some positions advocate, no, we shouldn't give them that unless we can require them to work because they're lazy. This has been a hot political issue in the United States for at least the last couple of decades and going up to the present day. The Constitution can be interpreted in lots of different ways. I don't think it's a constitutional issue. I think it's a political issue here in the United States, and it goes back and forth.
Of course, you're right. There's no one United States. I mean, there's many political figures that have the different positions. The bit about work requirements maybe has to do a little bit with accessibility. Saying, look, the government is responsible for making food accessible. That means that if someone wants to, if employment, that means people have the opportunity to avail themselves of employment, which they can do, and to earn the money that they need to acquire their basic necessities. But the government isn't obligated to supply it for free. That might be a way of looking at it, whereas others would say, no, it's really not accessible. You have to understand, the obstacles people face and so forth. I think we saw this quite a bit with regards to the debate about Obamacare in particular. I want to share with you a source here. I want to share with you a document. And this goes back to the Trump administration. Mike Pompeo, and to some extent, I think you might see this as a little bit of a Republican-Democrat issue or as well. Mike Pompeo was the Secretary of State for Donald Trump. And Pompeo organized a committee, an esteemed committee of United States experts on human rights to compile a document that would set out the United States' policies and priorities regarding human rights issues in general, with the idea of resetting or recalibrating the United States' approach to human rights issues on the international scene. Okay. And I'm going to share, it was a very lengthy report, and the report made great efforts, by the way, to be bipartisan, constantly quoting, he was, of course, Trump's Republican, constantly quoting Democratic figures as well. Let me share with you just a little excerpt from Trump's report, which I think speaks to the United States in a very interesting way. The report of the Commission on Unalienable Rights, and this was delivered in 2020 at the request of Mike Pompeo. And like I said, a lot of renowned university professors who are, of course, friendly to the Trump administration or friendly to the Republican Party took note of this. So I'm going to share with you a short section of it here. Relation of civil and political rights. Civil and political rights being those well-known human rights like the right to vote, the rights to gather, the right to freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and so forth, as opposed to economic and social rights. This is what it says. The Universal Declaration, referring to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we saw in the beginning here from 49, the Universal Declaration's weaving of civil and political rights together with economic, social, and cultural rights into an integrated whole, which is exactly what it does, listing everything, poses a certain challenge for the United States. Unlike the Universal Declaration, and unlike the majority of constitutions of the world that have adopted since the early to mid 20th century, the US Constitution does not generally recognize, let alone entrench, economic and social rights. Throughout the Cold War, the United States emphasized the commitment to civil and political rights almost exclusively, while rejecting the notion, championed by the Soviet Union, of the preeminence of economic and social rights. Since the end of the Cold War, a consistent aspect of US human rights policy across every presidential administration, regardless of political party, has been US reluctance to recognize economic and social rights as an integral part of the canon of international human rights. Even though the one fly in the ointment is the United States did vote for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says economic rights are just as important, but even though the U.S. delegation pledged wholehearted commitment to those rights when the Universal Declaration was adopted in 1948, we didn't really mean it, and the United States doesn't really recognize economic rights as on the same level as political rights. That's the position of Pompeo's commission. And in his view, and the view of Trump, and I think fair to say in the view of the Republican Party, to the extent that it can speak as a cohesive philosophy, that seems to be their view. Is that surprising to anyone? What do you think? Not a surprise that that's what the Republicans say? I see people shaking their heads, no, not a surprise. Do you agree with it, though? The question is this right? Do we agree with it? I see you shake your head also. What do you think about that? Okay, I'm going to share. All right, Lauren, go ahead. Just go ahead and say something.
Just as a Canadian, I find it so bizarre that the US doesn't have universal health care. It's the only Western democracy to not have universal health care. And when I've argued with Americans about it, I get completely ridiculous things like, well, shall we give colored TVs to everybody? No, you don't die without one. But it's beyond my imagination.
Okay, Lauren, there you go. What I want to show you, I think that's right here. Remember, that was a very bitter partisan fight. The Democratic Party's been pushing the for healthcare, universal healthcare and so forth. The Republicans have been opposing it tooth and nail. Trump wanted to repeal the Obamacare. I understand there's politics to it. I understand he hates Obama. But fundamentally, I would suggest the Republican Party does not believe that meeting the essential needs of citizens is the job of government. And they're saying it right there. The fundamental responsibility of government is political rights, freedom to vote, freedom from discrimination, the right to assemble. Economic rights are very second fiddle, very, very distant, and not a key responsibility of government at all. Hannah, did you want to chime in? Hannah, did you want to say something?
Yes, I
Go
do.
ahead.
I mean, I'm very biased. Everything that the Republicans say for me is crappy and nasty and evil. But there is it's missing the elephant of just menschiyut. I mean, freedom of speech won't give you health, won't give you food. People need food and people need health. And I'm from Israel, so it drives. I'm so angry, so angry, and I see that it gets worse and worse.
Hannah, yeah. But that's the other side of it. Exactly. What is the good of political rights if people don't have health care? What's the good of it if you don't have food? What's the good if you don't? Yeah, but what the Republicans are saying,
And
it's not
roof
just the
over their
Republicans, well,
house.
the others,
Excuse me, roof over their head. Don't tell me. People
yeah,
tell me
yeah,
people want to
basic
be
needs,
outside.
food, clothing, shelter, healthcare.
Yeah.
But the other side is going to say to you, they're going to say, yeah, but you don't want us interfering in the economy like the Soviet Union. You don't want us directing everybody and telling this one build a dam, this one build a mine. You don't want that.
There is a
So
middle way. There is a middle way. It's not this and it's not this. So
I understand. The
yeah,
trick is sometimes the middle way is hard. It can be very, very hard to find too.
there are, but
I
people
want to
have
show
to.
you one more thing.
Yeah, wait a minute. I also think that,
Go ahead.
you see the Democrats still think about health, about food, and I think the ones that have all this great idea of political freedom are the ones that have a lot of money and they're so detached from the real problems of just regular people. And I think it's awful. And it's just
You
awful.
know, Hannah, that's an excellent point, and that's a very excellent point. Is if you would shove a microphone into someone's face and say to them, "What does human rights mean to you?" Someone who is wealthy and has what they need may very well say, "Human rights means that my vote should count and there shouldn't be gerrymandering or something like that." Or human rights means that there shouldn't be discrimination in college admissions or whatever it is. Now, find somebody who is penniless, someone who's starving, someone who can't meet. They'll say human rights means food. Human rights means access to transportation, means a job. And those perspectives those situations make a very big difference on how we perceive human rights. You're absolutely right. It's very easy to sit with your full stomach in a house with a garage and say human rights are political and economic rights. Oh, that's just something we aspire to. Whereas if you're in a different situation, then you say economic rights come first. I just want to go back to one other. And here, remember to mute yourself when you're done, so we don't get an echo. One other thing is one thing. Other comment people will make about it is, even if you believe that economic rights are important and that are of primary importance, it can be very difficult sometimes for government to make those calls and to decide what should the minimum wage be, what should safety standards be. Sometimes what the most important thing we can do is to let people advocate for themselves. And the way you do that is with political rights. Meaning if you give people the right to unionize, for example, then suddenly higher wages and workplace safety become something that they can fight for, and they can fight for it according to their own values, what they see as most important. They can set the priorities. If you establish something like a social safety net, for example, a social security, unemployment benefits, for example, a benefit of unemployment benefits, not just does it help the person who is needing it, but unemployment benefits do a ton to get rid of abusive place situations, because then people are free to leave. If people know they can get unemployment benefits, for example, then they'll leave a toxic workplace. They'll leave an abusive workplace, and we won't have what they call today modern slavery. Well, you're not going to stay in that situation if you have options. But if you live in a society that doesn't have options, then you don't. So one way of looking at it is political rights ought to be most important. We might want to prioritize political rights, not because economic rights are less important, but granting people political rights can be a means to letting people assure themselves their own economic rights. Okay, Hannah, go ahead for 1 second, then I want to show us one more source for
I just want to say one thing. You also talk about minimum wage. We should talk about living wage. Minimum wage is not, it doesn't put food on the table and doesn't help them to be healthy. It has to be living age. And whenever I hear this, $15, they increase it to 18, I said, this is slavery. It's just different way of slavery. I'm sorry. I'm so upset about these things.
No, it's fine. Living wage. That's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is one approach is to let the government to decide what should be the minimum wage, what people have to be paid. Another way to look at it is, if that's an uphill battle, if that's too hard politically, and it's true, it's very hard. Should it be different in different places? Should there be a different minimum wage for teenagers? Everyone can have their own views. But if you give people political rights to advocate for themselves, you give them a social safety net, you give them a union, whatever it is, then those things will be advanced that way, even without the government passing legislation. Okay, let me do this. I want to show you one other source here, which is just reaction to the Trump document. Erwin asked, is there a definitive Jewish view? And on that, I'm gonna say, I think it's always a safe bet to say no. There are so many different voices in the Jewish tradition. I don't think it's fair on something like this to come and say there's a definitive Jewish view. But what I showed you in the Shulchan Aruch is very central, I think, to Jewish thought. It's a very central source there. Let me show you one other thing. I'm going to show you. This is Amnesty International. So Amnesty, of course, is a human rights group. And this is their response to Mike Pompeo's document where he said that political rights are primary and economic rights are secondary. And in all fairness, I didn't want to go into it here, but there are some other real issues that Amnesty objected to with Pompeo's report, because Pompeo's report put a lot of what you would call social issues on the side as well. Pompeo's report said, marriage rights, homosexual rights, a lot of those, what he calls social issues, he already tried to take out of the human rights category, which Amnesty is reacting to as well. But here you go. This is what Amnesty says back. In August of 2020, Mike Pompeo's Commission on Unalienable Rights presented its final report, which creates a hierarchy of human rights, meaning puts a couple of political rights or main basic political rights first and everything else second. And it undermines the United States' commitment to international human rights standards, treaties, and agreements. The report sets out to define which rights are unalienable, elevating religious liberty and the right to private property. The very undertaking of the Commission in its report attempts to negate decades of human rights progress. The United States government cannot unilaterally redefine which human rights will be respected and which will be ignored. The report is falsely premised on the idea that a proliferation of rights has undermined the legitimacy and credibility of the human rights framework. It seeks to ignore treaties to which the United States is a party, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other treaties he's referring to, and decades of U.S. foreign policy and multilateral negotiations that represent international consensus. Here's their recommendations, their talking points. Human rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated, including economic rights. We cannot create a hierarchy of rights. The United States cannot unilaterally redefine which human rights will be respected and which will be ignored. The Commission has undermined decades of human rights progress, and the United States should be a leader rather than carving it out. And the recommendation is to explicitly reject the Commission, its reports, its government's retreat, and then reject everything. That's Amnesty's view. The whole thing is bad and reject it all. So there you go. So let me just sum up because we're just about out of time. Is what we began is with a statement in the Haggadah that all who are hungry let them come and eat. And I asked the basic question, is that a statement of human rights values or is it something else? And we saw, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it clearly is a statement of human rights values. But then it becomes a little bit more tricky. Governments can't necessarily provide for everyone. Maybe they can just make it available for everyone. But then maybe political rights are actually important because if we give political rights, it can help people meet their economic rights, and we shouldn't prioritize political rights so much. And then we saw maybe a different way of looking at it from the Shulchan Aruch, that maybe we shouldn't even take a human rights view to this. Maybe it's more about making sure society is cohesive and it functions. And then we saw that in the United States, that still economic rights are not accepted, certainly by all the political parties, and it's very it's tough going for that. Okay, so let me just close by saying this is the Human Rights Haggadah that I put together. So what we just did is really what this Haggadah is aimed for. To understand that there's multiple sides, competing values behind every human rights issue. And as issues come up, my goal in this Haggadah is to show a couple of sources and then to ask discussion questions, which just help sort of explain what the frictions might be and to ask us some questions to guide us to helping us discuss those values and begin to come up with our own positions, with the understanding the human rights values does not necessarily lead to one particular political or social action position. There's many different legitimate views that we could have, and to help us think a little better about these sources and to come up with our own views. So I have this Haggadah. If anyone's interested for Pesach, you can get it at Haggadahs or Us or on Amazon, or there's a website, HR Haggadah, Human Rights Haggadah is hrhaggadah.com, where you'll also be able to buy Haggadot, and also I blog about human rights issues as they pertain in particular to Israel and the Jewish community, and you're welcome to see that too. Okay, so it's exactly an hour. So I'm going to, if anyone has a final comment or question, or I'm going to turn it back over.
Thank you so much. If anybody has a quick question, you're getting some thank yous on the chat there, Rabbi Shlomo.
Okay. No, thank you everyone for participating. And like I said, this isn't a conclusion, but hopefully there's something to think about and a little bit more of an understanding of where different people might be coming from as we discuss these issues.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And thank you again, Rabbi Shlomo. Have an amazing day, everybody. Take care.